The sun over Daryllus 4 never really set. It just dimmed behind thick orange clouds that turned the sky into a rust-colored soup. Beneath it, the battlefield stretched for miles, craters, blackened trees, shrapnel embedded in the cracked soil like metal weeds. Kellan Locke wiped his face with the back of his trembling hand. His helmet was gone, his shoulder plate cracked. Blood soaked through the lower half of his fatigues. Not his. He didn't have time to check whose. "Medic!" he shouted, voice hoarse and cracking from smoke and dust. "We need a medic here." A few meters ahead, under the collapsed wing of a downed carrier, lay Sergeant Wil Murrow. Half his torso was buried under twisted alloy, and his breathing was wet, heavy, labored. Kellan crouched beside him, wincing at the stench of scorched flesh and ozone. Wil's eyes fluttered open, then shut again. "Hang on, Wil. You're not dying out here." A sleek figure approached, its four legs moving in smooth, calculated steps. The alien medic's pale exoskin shimmered faintly with embedded bio-lights, pulsing calm blue. His name was Vesh. Kellan had worked with it before. Efficient, cold, never asked questions. Vesh knelt beside Wil, scanning with a device that hummed once, then dimmed. Multiple thoracic punctures. One lung collapsed, internal hemorrhaging, structural compromise to the lower spine. Vital signs subcritical. "Then fix it," Kellan growled. Vesh looked at him, unblinking. Prognosis: non-viable. Resuscitation would exceed energy allocation for a Class B soldier. Directive requires triage redirection. Kellan stepped in front of it. "You're just gonna leave him? The subject will expire within minutes. Reallocation is optimal." "No," Kellan snapped. He looked down at Wil, whose blood now pooled under the crushed metal. "We don't leave our own." Vesh stood up, already turning away. Kellan grabbed the edge of the wreckage and strained, his teeth gritted, arms shaking. The metal groaned but didn't budge. "Help me," he shouted. Vesh didn't even pause. Kellan dropped to his knees beside Wil, panting. "All right, fine. I'll do it myself." He dug both hands under the metal, adjusted his stance, then gave a guttural yell as he heaved upward. His back screamed. Nothing. He repositioned and tried again. This time the wing shifted just enough to let more of Wil's abdomen slide free. That gave Kellan a better angle. He wedged a bent rifle under the side and used it as a lever. Inch by inch, he pushed the metal up and over. The moment Wil's torso was clear, Kellan slumped beside him. Wil coughed, red froth bubbling at his lips. "All right, buddy, stay with me," Kellan whispered. He yanked off a strip of his own uniform, then one more, and pressed both down hard on Wil's side where blood was spilling like a broken faucet. The pressure was immediate, searing, but necessary. Wil spasmed. "Hurts?" "I know," Kellan said. "But you're not dying on me today." He kept pressure steady, hands coated in blood, his arms trembling. Each breath Wil took was shallow and ragged. Kellan couldn't do much about the lung, but he could keep him from bleeding out. Beside them, the battle moved on distant artillery, the buzz of skimmers overhead. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Kellan didn't let go. By the time the second wave of medics arrived, human this time, Wil was unconscious but still breathing. Barely. "Move!" shouted the lead medic, a tall redhead with a trauma kit already open. "You keep pressure?" "Yeah," Kellan said, his voice a rasp. "He's still going." The medics worked fast, inserting a chest tube and starting for fluids. One of them scanned Wil's vitals and looked at Kellan with disbelief. "He should have bled out 10 minutes ago." "Guess he didn't," Kellan muttered, then collapsed backward, arms limp. He woke up in the triage dome, hooked to a fluid drip, his hands cleaned but sore. The haze in his head cleared slowly. A monitor beeped somewhere to his left. Nearby, someone was arguing in clipped tones. Says he survived only through unauthorized intervention. Kellan turned his head and saw Vesh standing near the entrance, conversing with Lieutenant Rena Taro. Rena was not someone who tolerated nonsense. Her arms were crossed, and her glare could melt titanium. You're telling me that saving a soldier's life violated your protocol? The human applied pressure, prolonging cardiac function. However, the odds of full recovery remain statistically low. Our directive prioritizes efficient survival ratios, not individual efforts. Well, your directive can go file itself, Rena snapped. Vesh tilted his head. I will record the anomaly for future analysis. Kellan groaned as he sat up. You do that. Rena walked over. You're lucky you didn't pass out from exhaustion. He's luckier, Kellan said, nodding toward the recovery bay where we'll now lay, connected to machines but alive. Rena pulled a chair over and Saturday. You know he's got a long road ahead. Broken ribs, punctured lung, spinal damage. He's gonna be in rehab for months. But he's alive, Kellan said. Thanks to you. Kellan shook his head. I just did what anyone should have done. Rena didn't argue, but her expression softened. You did what the medics wouldn't. That counts for something. A week later, Kellan was cleared for light duty. He spent most of it visiting Wil, who was now awake but weak, his voice still gravel and pain. Doc says I'll walk again, he said one afternoon, his eyes glassy with morphine. Eventually. You will, Kellan said. And you'll owe me a beer. Wil grinned. 2 minimum. Outside the medbay, Kellan ran into Vesh again. The alien regarded him with the same distant curiosity. You defied protocol. Yeah, Kellan said. I did. By your actions, the injured subject survived. That will be noted. Good. Maybe next time you won't walk away. I do not experience regret, but I will record the variables. Kellan looked at it. You don't have to regret. Just do better. Vesh paused. I will consider that. Weeks turned to months. Wil's condition improved steadily. He spent 6 weeks in the recovery bay, then another 3 in hydrotherapy and assisted movement. Kellan visited when he could, helped with exercises, joked about Wil's terrible taste in music, and kept him distracted during the worst days. When Wil finally stood upright, leaning on a walker, Kellan was there. Never thought I'd be this happy to see you upright, Kellan said. Wil wiped sweat from his brow. It's like learning to walk all over again. But I'm doing it. You are. Later, during the debrief back on Earth, Vesh gave a full report to the Interspecies Medical Council. His final words were unexpected. Human capacity for unsanctioned intervention introduces unpredictable variables. However, in rare cases, it yields statistically favorable outcomes. Subject Kellan Locke's actions extended the life of Sergeant Wil Murrow beyond projected expectancy. Recommendation: further study on human emergency decision-making under stress. Kellan didn't care about the papers or the reports. What mattered was that Wil was alive, walking, and eventually discharged with honors. On the day of Wil's return home, Kellan helped him down the steps of the shuttle. You're gonna be all right, Kellan said. I already am, Wil replied. Because you didn't give up. Kellan grinned. Like I said, we don't leave our own. Kellan stood with his arms crossed outside the auxiliary trauma wing on orbital station Hesperus. The only human among a dozen alien medics in pale green uniforms that didn't wrinkle or stain. The air inside the dome was overly filtered, sterile to a fault. Everything smelled like ozone and synthetic antiseptics, no hint of blood or sweat or anything remotely real. The panel beside the door pulsed in concentric circles as it scanned his ID badge. A soft chime granted access. You are not on rotation, a voice said from behind. It was low, almost musical, and unmistakably condescending. Kellan turned. The alien was tall, with translucent ridges down its arms and a posture so upright it looked carved. Vesh again, though this time its uniform carried a silver crest, some kind of promotion, apparently. "I'm not clocking in," Kellan said. "I'm here to observe." Vesh didn't blink. Probably couldn't. "Your presence introduces variables. Observation is restricted to personnel with advanced clearance." "I was invited," Kellan replied, "by Dr. Anair." Vesh's shoulders shifted in what might have been a shrug or a muscle check. "Proceed." Inside, the trauma wing was arranged in concentric rings, each filled with diagnostic pods, surgical webs, and tanks for fluid-based treatment. At the center was a clear enclosure with a humanoid figure suspended in a low-gravity field. Dr. Anair Phyrexian, with 4 arms and a face like a wrinkled blossom, was adjusting a control panel with 2 of her hands while flipping through data on a hovering display with the other 2. "He's stable enough for the procedure," she said without looking up. "We'll begin the spinal support graft in 20 minutes. Kellan stepped closer to the transparent barrier. Will floated inside, eyes closed, breathing regulated by a narrow tube under his nose. His legs twitched slightly, involuntary spasms from the nerve regrowth stimulants. "Why not now?" Kellan asked, watching the tiny readouts dance across the pod's side. Anair finally turned to him. "Because the immunosuppressants are still integrating. If we start before full absorption, the graft could be rejected. You'd rather we wait than risk paralysis." He nodded. "How much function will he get back?" "Assuming no complications, 70 to 80%. He'll need mechanical assistance for high-impact movement, but he'll walk." Kellan exhaled through his nose, not quite relief, but something close. "He hates sitting still." "He'll learn patience," Anair said, her voice dry. "Or he'll fall down a great deal." Another medic, a squat creature with 6 eyes and no neck, rolled a tray of tools toward the field. Anair flicked her fingers, and the pod's gravity dropped another fraction. Wil's body floated weightlessly. Kellan stepped back. "You sure this is better than letting him heal naturally?" Anair's eyes twitched slightly. "If you want scar tissue to close around his nerves like a noose, then yes, natural healing is a lovely idea." He held up his hands. "Just asking." The lights dimmed slightly as the surgical web activated. Dozens of fine filaments descended from the ceiling, aligning themselves with exact points on Wil's spine and lower back. The graft material, shimmering like liquid silver, hovered in containment until Anair gestured it forward. "We'll begin now," she said. "You may stay, but don't interfere." Kellan moved to the observation alcove, arms folded, heart thudding. The procedure was silent, except for occasional chirps from the monitors. The filaments pierced the flesh with microscopic precision, guiding the graft layer by layer along the damaged vertebrae. No blood, no stitches, just light and motion and nerve maps rendered in real time. Half an hour passed, then 45 minutes. At the hour mark, Anair gave a short nod. "He'll need 2 days in the suspension field before we test motor function," she said. Kellan approached again. "What about pain?" "Managed chemically," she said, "though your species seems to have a strange threshold for it." He tilted his head. "Strange how? You endure extremes without complaint, then scream at minor injuries. A paradox. Maybe we just know when it matters." Anair didn't respond. She returned to her instruments. Later that evening, at least, what counted as evening on a station without a sky, Kellan sat in the rec bay sipping from a metallic pouch of nutrient broth. It was lukewarm and slightly bitter, but it settled his stomach. Across from him sat a pair of Cerny engineers, all long limbs and iridescent skin. They were watching a human documentary on an overhead screen, something about wilderness survival. Why does the human not consume the berries? One asked. Because they're poisonous, said the other. But he tasted them first. To check. The first one shivered, its skin darkening to a muted teal. That is irrational. Kellan raised his pouch in salute. It's called improvisation. They both turned. The closer one leaned in. You taste unknown substances to determine danger? Not always, Kellan said. But sometimes you have to work fast. The second Cerny tilted its head. Your species accepts risk at primitive levels. We call it guts, Kellan said. The Cerny didn't respond immediately. Eventually, the first one said, Your soldier. He should not have survived. I know. And yet he did. Kellan stood. Because we don't walk away just because the odds are bad. Back in the trauma wing the next morning, Wil was conscious. Groggy, but alert. His voice was raspy. Feels like I got run over by a shuttle. You did, Kellan said. Metaphorically. Wil blinked slowly. I had dreams. Yeah. Something about being underwater. Everything was quiet. But then I heard your voice. You were yelling about leverage. Kellan chuckled. Sounds accurate. Wil looked down at his legs. I can't feel anything below the knee. You will, Kellan said. They did the graft last night. You're in a zero-grav tank to keep pressure off the spine. Wil nodded faintly. How long till I'm out of this fishbowl? 2 days. Wil grimaced. You staying? Yeah. That afternoon, Vesh entered the trauma wing again. This time with 2 other aliens in tow, one a tall, spindly creature with a face like a branching coral. The other a broad-shouldered being whose skin pulsed with slow color shifts. We are investigating human triage deviations, the coral-faced one announced. Your recent actions are under review. Kellan didn't move from his seat beside Wil's tank. Review all you want. I'm not apologizing. That is not required, said the color-shifting one. We seek data, not contrition. Vesh remained silent, eyes fixed on Wil. The survival of this individual has triggered secondary protocol analysis. Your methods conflict with our statistical models. Kellan stood slowly. So change the models. You're not dealing with machines. The coral-faced being made a clicking noise. Emotion is not a variable we quantify. Then maybe you're missing half the equation. They left without further comment. That evening, Wil moved his toes. Barely, but enough to trigger a calibration alarm. An air reset the field parameters and confirmed spinal signal conductivity had returned to the lower extremities. He's regenerating faster than projected, she said. Could be the graft. Could be willpower. Kellan leaned back in his chair. Or maybe you just underestimated us again. Anair tapped her screen. I'll log it as an anomaly. As the lights dimmed again to simulate dusk, Wil drifted back to sleep, his legs now twitching with the beginnings of movement. Kellan stayed beside him, listening to the faint hum of the station, the quiet rhythm of machines keeping everything alive. He didn't know what the aliens would do with their data, or if they'd ever understand why someone would waste their own strength to save a dying man. But he didn't care about the reports or the variables. Wil was healing. That was enough. Wil's fingers curled around the grip rail for the first time just after the artificial dawn cycle began. The gravity in the rehab chamber had been slowly increased over the past 2 days, and now it stood at 70% of Earth standard. Enough to challenge muscle groups without risking collapse. Kellan stood a few feet away, arms at his sides, watching without interfering. A squat, four-eyed physiokinetic therapist named Truan monitored neural response data from a nearby console. Truan's species had no knees, and Kellan couldn't tell if it was impressed or bored. Wil took one step, then another. His jaw was tight, breath thin through his teeth. You need a break? Kellan asked. No, Wil said. I need the railing to stop moving. It's not moving. Then my legs are drunk, Wil muttered. Truin tapped a sensor on Wil's spine. Balance is within expected deviation. Minor tremors in the left quadriceps, but the nerve conduction is sufficient. Wil grunted and took another step. Feels like I'm wearing someone else's legs. You kind of are, Kellan said. Helpful as ever. They made it halfway across the chamber before Wil had to stop. He leaned forward against the support bar, sweat running down his back, his shirt clinging to him like wet paper. Truin handed him a hydration tab. Wil took it without speaking. Kellan glanced at the monitor. Muscle fatigue? Predictable, Truin said. 10% improvement compared to the last cycle. Neural adaptation is steady. Wil looked up. So I'm not terrible. You are inefficient, Truin said. But not failing. Wil turned to Kellan. That sounded like encouragement. Did it sound like encouragement? Alien version of a pep talk. Truin blinked all four eyes one at a time and returned to the console. Later that cycle, Kellan found himself at the station's communal mess. He sat between a pair of gelatinous beings who communicated through vibrations in their membranes. Their conversation sounded like a bag of marbles being stirred in syrup. Across the table, Rena Taro stirred something green and fibrous in a bowl. She didn't look up. He's ahead of schedule. Kellan nodded. He's not thrilled about how much he sweats. But yeah. Rena pushed her food around, then finally set the spoon down. You ever think about what happens when he goes home? He's got a brother in Vermont, Kellan said, and a dog that probably thinks he died. He won't be the same. He doesn't want to be. He wants to be better. Rena leaned forward. That kind of recovery? It changes how you see everything. People expect gratitude. They don't expect anger, or nightmares, or silence. They think survival's the end of the story. Kellan didn't answer at first. The gelatinous beings had moved away, leaving a faint smell of iodine behind. He's not going to owe anyone, Kellan said. He made it. That's his, not theirs. Rena stood. Make sure he remembers that. The next day, Truin introduced a weighted resistance suit. It looked like a mesh of carbon fiber and ceramic plates, segmented to allow natural movement but heavy enough to double Wil's effort with every step. Kellan helped him into it without a word. Truin adjusted the calibration. This will strain the lumbar support. You may experience tremors or nausea. Wil adjusted the chest strap. Sounds like a party. Truin stepped back. Begin. Wil took a breath, then moved forward. His gait was uneven at first, left leg dragging slightly. The suit shifted weight subtly, making him overcorrect, then undercorrect. He clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the far end of the chamber. Kellan paced beside him, silent, ready to catch but not interfering. By the fifth step, Wil was shaking. By the 10th, he collapsed to one knee. Reset, Truin said. No, Wil growled, forcing himself up. I've got it. Reset is advised. Truin repeated, more insistent. Wil stood. I said no. Kellan glanced at Truin. Let him finish this round. Truin hesitated, then nodded once. Wil continued. Another step, then two. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking the collar of his suit. His breathing grew ragged. By the time he reached the end of the chamber, his legs were barely holding him up. He turned, walked back, and collapsed into the recovery chair. His chest heaved. Truin checked the readings. Adrenal spike noted. Muscular inflammation with intolerance. Wil closed his eyes. Still inefficient? Less so, Truin said. Kellan handed him a cold compress. Wil took it without opening his eyes. I didn't think I'd make it halfway. You made it both ways. Wil chuckled weakly. So when do I get to dance? I wouldn't push it, Kellan said. You've got the rhythm of a dropped toolbox. The next rotation brought evaluation day. A council of interspecies medical officers gathered in the observation tier. Vesh stood among them, flanked by two others from its caste nearly identical in build and stance. Their expressions were unreadable. Wil entered the chamber in the full resistance suit, walking unassisted. He paused once, adjusted his balance, then continued across the floor, turned, and returned. Anair monitored from the control station. She didn't speak, didn't react. After the demonstration, Wil stepped out of the suit. Kellan helped him pull the arm plates free. You did fine, Kellan said. I didn't fall. That's fine enough. One of the council members, a species with no visible mouth or ears, projected a series of conclusions directly into Anair's console. Truin read them aloud. Patient has regained 78% baseline mobility. Neural integration is stable. Full discharge to planetary environment is approved. Wil looked at Kellan. That mean I can go home? Yeah, Kellan said. It does. Vesh approached them afterward. This outcome was not anticipated. Kellan looked up. You expected him to plateau. Statistical modeling suggested a 35% recovery rate. This exceeds projection. Maybe update the models. Vesh paused. This instance will be recorded as outlier data. Wil leaned forward slightly. Or maybe your model's just bad at measuring people. Vesh didn't respond, turned and left. 2 days later, they stood in the station's shuttle bay. Wil wore civilian clothes now. Standard issue travel bag over one shoulder, a small brace still on his left leg. Rena handed him a file. Clearance for Earth return, medical summary, and a letter from command. You'll want to read it before you land. Do I want to know what's in it? Wil asked. You're being reassigned to veteran liaison duty. They want you to help others through recovery. Wil blinked. I didn't agree to that. They're not forcing it, but they're offering. He looked at Kellan. You think I'd be any good at that? You lived it, Kellan said. Nobody else can explain what it's like better than you. Wil nodded slowly. Maybe I'll give it a try. He boarded the shuttle without fanfare. Just before the hatch closed, he turned. Thanks, he said, for not leaving. Kellan raised a hand. It wasn't a favor. It was the right thing. The shuttle lifted off, engines humming low, and vanished into the launch corridor. Back in the medbay, Anair reviewed the final report. Truin stood beside her. This result, Truin said, was not predicted. Anair tapped the screen. Sometimes resilience is not a factor you can quantify. Will the protocols change? Eventually. But first, the models must catch up to reality. Kellan stood just outside, watching them. He didn't need the report. He'd seen the result. And that was enough.